Halloween. It's the one night of the year when it's perfectly normal for monsters to walk among us. It's the time when everyone puts on their costumes and masks and heads out to play make-believe. But what if there was someone truly evil hiding behind one of those disguises? And they use the dark festivity of Halloween to turn a nightmare into reality. That's exactly what happened to 21-year-old Nicole Hutchings, and this is her story. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you've never been here before, I'm Kimbyrleigha. Nice to finally meet you. So I feel like I haven't been here for a while, but I've actually done more videos than usual. They're just not on my regular day, but today is a special day because it is Halloween, and this is the last video in my Halloween series for this year, and I'm going to miss this series. I'm so thankful for all of you who tuned in, and now we're going to be heading into our Fall Frightmare series. We don't have a sponsor for today, but for this special Halloween episode, I would love for you to do me a favor and check out my brand new YouTube channel. It's a true crime channel. It's with my boyfriend, John. It's called Darklivity. And today we launched our very first video, and it's a deep dive. So if you like that kind of thing, check it out. I will link it at the end of this video. Don't go now because I want you to watch this video, but I'll put it in the description box and I'll put it in the cards and at the end, like I said. There's going to be new episodes every week on Mondays, and here is a little sneak peek before we jump in. Within the realm of true crime, there's a murky domain where the darkness of human nature reveals itself, and cautionary tales emerge, reminding us of the lurking shadows contained within our own lives. And today we're sharing a chilling tale that unravels an intricate web of obsession, jealousy, and misplaced trust. It serves as a jarring reminder to remain vigilant, particularly in matters of the heart. This case exposes the grim reality of falling prey to the lure of the wrong people and unmasking the harrowing consequences that can unfold. Darklivity is all about the dark downward slope into the depravity of the human mind and the consequences that such darkness brings to light. Thank you so very much for watching a little preview, but now let's get serious and let's get into this case for today. Like I said, this is the very last video for the All Hallows Horrors series, and I'd like to introduce you to Nicole Marie Hutchings. Nicole, who was called Nikki by her family and friends, was born in San Francisco, California on June 15th, 1983, to her mom, Robin, who met Nicole's stepfather, James Hutchings, who went by Jim, when Nicole was only 1.5 years old. Jim was the only father that Nikki ever knew, and he considered her his daughter and raised her like she was. So I'm going to refer to Jim as Nikki's father, like she did. Over the coming years, 2 more children joined the Hutchings family. Nikki got a little sister, Amanda, in January of 1987, and her little brother, Timothy, in July of 1992. After Jim got out of the Marine Corps in 1987, he and Robin decided they wanted to raise their family in a quieter, smaller town, and they fell in love with Bend, Oregon. It had such a peaceful atmosphere, and it was one of the first places that Jim and Robin took Nikki for vacation, and she saw snow for the very first time. It was a very memorable experience. She absolutely loved it. They played in the snow together, they built a snowman, and with all the fond memories, the family picked up and moved from California to Bend, which isn't exactly a small town per se, but it's said to be either a small city or a big town with a small town feel. It's nestled in the heart of the Cascade Mountains. Bend, Oregon is a city with a split personality, so to speak. On one hand, it's a laid-back outdoor paradise. You've got world-class skiing, mountain biking, and hiking. But on the other hand, it's a thriving, bustling, creative community with a vibrant art scene, a growing craft beer industry, and diverse culinary locations as well. So this duality is actually reflected in the city's landscape as well, because in downtown, you'll find these charming brick buildings and tree-lined streets. But if you venture a little further out, you'll find yourself surrounded by towering pines and jagged mountain peaks. So it really is the best of both worlds and a very nice place to raise kids. So in 1987, the town had about 60,000 residents. It was definitely populated back then, and now it's Central Oregon's most populated city. I think I can see why so many people want to call it home. It's gorgeous. Look at this waterfall, the snow-capped mountains. The landscape changes as well through the season. So you've got sunny summers and then beautiful fall and snow falling in the winter. The Hutchings moved to more of a rural area. They got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,300 square foot home along Deschutes River. The river was in their backyard. They could go fishing right outside, just steps away from their door. And that's something that Nikki had been doing since she was only 2 years old. Once in Bend, they enjoyed taking little Nikki to Drake Park, and it's gorgeous. It's one of the city's most popular parks. A lot of people from the community frequent the area, surrounded by ponderosa pines, and it's close to a bunch of downtown shops. And this park has many events throughout the year, like music events, movies. It's a great place for a little nature walk. And it's actually the place that Nikki gave her grandpa his nickname, Grandpa Duck. Because the first time he took her there, they saw a bunch of ducks, and she could hardly talk at the time, but she managed to say, Grandpa Duck, Grandpa Duck. And it stuck. And it's funny what kind of things stick like that. Let me know if you have any nicknames for your grandparents. I always like to know those things. I had a Mimi and a Graham. So Drake Park would also remain one of Nikki's favorite places to spend time as she got older. The Hutchings' new home, like I told you, had the perfect view of this river from their kitchen and their living room windows. They settled in right before Nikki turned 4, and her little sister Amanda was born. As soon as she became a big sister, Robin said that Nikki was like a little mom. She was so cute, she would sit there and feed her little sister. She even helped her change her diapers, and she would always ask her mom to take little Amanda out of her crib to play. Nikki also loved learning. Her mom said she actually begged to go to school before she was ready, and she did really well throughout her elementary years. Jim called Nikki a math whiz, cannot relate, but she also loved learning things from her mom, who was a very proud homemaker. She liked to go camping, do craft projects, write poetry, and of course, spend time with her family. Nikki learned to cook and to sew, and she even helped sew buttons back on Jim's military uniforms. But she had a daring side as well. Not that you can't if you like doing those things, but Nikki, she liked being one of the boys, so to speak. She started shooting rifles when she was only 7 years old with her dad, and she also became best buddies with her little brother, who was born 5 years after they settled into Bend, completing the Hutchings family. Another thing Nikki loved to do was actually have silly string fights. She and her friends from school would come over and they would have full-on silly string shootouts. I actually miss that stuff. I got to see if I can still get my hands on it because I don't think my daughter's ever seen it before, but I remember those days. At first, Jim took a job as a long-haul trucker, but he found it was hard to balance his work and his personal life. His children were his main priority, and he hated being away from them for so long. Due to the nature of his job, he would spend days, if not weeks, on the road, making it hard for him to be present for all of his children's important memories. Despite his job's financial benefits, Jim ultimately left the trucking industry to spend more time with his family. There was so much to do in Bend, and whether Nikki was by the water or amongst the trees, she seemed to operate on a different level. Being in nature as she grew up put her completely at peace. And I would not go so far as to say that she had Disney princess vibes, but picture Snow White with all the wild animals drawn to her. But that's exactly how Nikki was, and she was drawn to them too. Those who knew her said she had a magnetic energy when she was outdoors. It was almost like this radiant joy that came over her, and you could almost feel it when you were around her. She absolutely knew she wanted to be around animals as much as she could, and from a young age, she wanted to go into a career that would allow her to do just that. And sometimes you just know. At 12 years old, she no longer wanted to shoot deer when she went hunting with Jim. Instead, she would point them out and say, "Daddy, look at that deer." And then they would all get scared away. And Jim said jokingly that that was the last time she ever went hunting with him. She did begin having some issues at school when she was in 8th grade. It was a tough time for her. Robin recalls having to race over to the school to find out that Nikki was in trouble yet again. She was a tough girl, and she was very outspoken. If she took issue with something, she would let it be known, and not everyone liked that. And this didn't end after middle school. Nikki was known to stick up for herself and someone you should not mess with. Jim said that he taught all of his kids to defend themselves, and she did, but her outspoken nature actually came from her mama. Nikki attended Mountain View High School where she met a lot of people. She had a number of very close friends, both guys and girls. She liked to have a lot of fun, but she did have an issue staying out of trouble when she did so. I've said it before, she had this tough side to her, and unfortunately, it led her to getting in physical fights, and one of them ended up in a suspension. Nikki really needed an outlet, something that she could give her energy to so that she would kind of stay out of trouble. She knew she wanted to go to college and become either a veterinarian or a marine biologist. When she was old enough, she even got a tattoo of a dolphin on her left shoulder because she loved dolphins and wolves. She had a soft spot for both. So she decided to volunteer at the Humane Society of Central Oregon, and this led her to find out about an amazing opportunity to work at a wolf sanctuary. Despite all of the demands of high school and her social life, she was determined to pursue her passion, which, if you haven't guessed, was animals. When she was finally old enough, she took a job at that wolf sanctuary to gain more hands-on experience. And when she was working, she wasn't just standing around on the sidelines watching. No, she wasn't. Nikki was always getting her hands dirty cleaning out stalls or handling all the animals. She was up for every challenge. That included possibly going into the Marine Corps. That was something else on her list, just like her dad. So that was another outlet for her. She enrolled in the Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps at Mountain View High. She wanted to be more regimented and work on her grades. So she also participated in the Oregon Youth Challenge program. Now, this was sponsored by the Oregon National Guard. It's designed to teach teens work skills and discipline, and it helped Nikki tremendously, so much so that she wanted to give back. So during her teen years and the summers between her sophomore and junior year and her junior and senior year, Nikki worked with the Youth Conservation Corps. The teens in this program are given schooling and work skill training. They would take on projects to help improve public lands, and Nikki, she was always thinking of others. She even saved enough money that she would buy other people things. And one of the things she bought was for her mom. It was a beautiful silver cross pendant, and it had gold leaves on it. You can tell from everything I've told you that Nikki is compassionate, she's caring, and she loves people. During her senior year, Nikki actually moved on site of the wolf sanctuary, and I thought this was so cool. Her everyday routine consisted of living and taking care of these animals, and a bus would transport her to and from school. Now, I'd never heard of anything like this, and she absolutely loved it, and I think I would too. Did you do something like this? Because it sounds really cool. It sounds too good to be true, but this is what she was doing. After Nikki graduated in 2001, she actually decided to continue living and working at the wolf sanctuary. She began working with horses too, and she would do guided tours for people that came to visit. Finally, in the fall of 2001, Nikki wanted a change, sort of. She wanted to come back and live with her family, and of course, she was welcomed with open arms. The thing is, she did have to move into her old room with her little sister Amanda, and there was some sibling rivalry there. She was actually very close with her brother. They were attached at the hip anytime they were together. But Amanda, she had her own group of friends. She enjoyed kind of doing her own thing. But the sisters did get along very well. They just went through that typical time when they're two teenagers living under the same roof and in one bedroom. So even though they had their normal disagreements as teens usually do, they loved each other and they liked spending time together with their family. When Nikki moved back in, she quickly got a job, and actually a number of them over the next few years. This is not too uncommon for a teen. She would start working somewhere, get a few paychecks, get a little money, and then quit. She just didn't know exactly what she wanted to do yet. But one thing was certain, Nikki always knew how to make friends. Her mom remembers her bringing a new friend home every week, and she would have no idea where she met this person. But many times, Nikki would also move out and live with those friends here and there, but then she would come back to live with her family. And even when she wasn't living under their roof, she wouldn't go more than a couple days without seeing them. They thought it was always nice having Nikki around, and they were so happy when she came back to live with them again in September of 2004. The holidays were right around the corner, and the Hutchings family always looked forward to spending time together. And I told you that this was a Halloween-related case. Well, the kids in Bend, Oregon, like many other children across the United States, like to get dressed up for Halloween and go trick-or-treating. Almost every house was decorated and waiting for kids to come knocking. But as the Hutchings kids got older, they grew out of trick-or-treating and would rather spend time at parties or doing other festive activities. By 2004, the Hutchings family had relocated to a similar 3-bedroom, 2-bath home about 15 minutes away from where they previously were living. Now, this area is much more populated. You can see lots of houses. It's a suburban area. Their home was on the end of a cul-de-sac with breathtaking mountain views. In the Wishing Well subdivision, it was Halloween night on Sunday, October 31st in 2004. Nikki was 21, Amanda was 17, and Tim was 13. That morning, Amanda got ready for work for her job at a local department store nearby. She was expecting to get done somewhere around 7:45 p.m. Amanda did not drive yet, and she relied on either her parents or her older sister, Nikki, to pick her up and drop her off when she needed to go anywhere. So even though Amanda's workplace was within walking distance from their home, she did not like walking home alone, in the dark, at night, especially on Halloween night. So she asked Nikki if she could come get her later. But Nikki had plans of her own. She wanted to stay home and hand out candy. So she said, you know what? Dad will be out of work by then. He'll probably opt to just swing by and pick you up. Jim did everything for his family, especially his kids, and he was more than happy to go get Amanda that night. He didn't want her to walk home all by herself. He called being a dad his number one job, even though his actual job was a local bus driver. Nikki wanted to be home at night for those trick-or-treaters. That's fun, being on the other side of the door once you hit a certain age and get to hand out all the candy and see the fun costumes. You know, I've never done that before. At my age, I've never done that before. I still go trick-or-treating every year. Before Amanda left, Nicole turned to her in a serious tone and asked her if she could talk to her about something important when she got home. It seemed like Nikki had something on her mind. So Amanda agreed that she would, and then she left. The day started out perfectly normal. Robin and Nikki got the candy ready for the kids, and Jim went off to work. Later that evening, when he came home, the family had fun handing out some candy for a bit until Jim had to leave to go get Amanda and run a few errands. There had been many knocks on that door that night, one after the other, but there was one right before 10 p.m. that was different. It was too late to be trick-or-treaters, and Robin was taking care of the household chores, so Nikki went to see who it was. It wouldn't have been her dad and sister who they were expecting home any minute because they wouldn't need to knock. So she had no idea who would be at their doorstep that night. When she opened the door, she was surprised to see a couple of her close friends standing outside. They were on their way to a nearby Halloween party at a mutual friend's house and wanted to know if Nikki was interested in coming along. So Nikki, being 21, she definitely liked to hang out, party, and have a few drinks, especially on a festive night like Halloween. So she said yes. She told her friends she would be right back, and she quickly went inside to let her mom know that she'd be going to a friend's Halloween party. Robin didn't even think twice about it. It was completely typical of Nikki. She was very independent, but responsible enough to at least let her parents know where she was going and check in. Robin just told Nikki to be safe and have fun. She had no idea that would be the last time she saw her daughter. The last goodbye. The last time she would see her smile as she was excited to have some fun that night. Her very last Halloween with Nikki, and one that would be undoubtedly etched into her memory forever. When Nikki got to the Halloween party, it was filled with a bunch of her friends, as well as people that she didn't know. Some were in full-on costumes, so you couldn't even make out who they were, and then other people came dressed in normal, everyday clothing, and that is how Nikki went, because it was a choice that she made at the very last minute. But there was dancing, of course, loud music, drinking, all while being surrounded by Halloween decorations. This party extended past midnight into the early morning hours of November 1st. As everyone fell back into their post-spooky season normality, the Hutchings household was getting up for a typical Monday morning. That's when Jim noticed that Nikki wasn't around, so he checked her room, and she wasn't there. He had no idea that she had gone out the night before. The last time he saw her, she was in her room filling out job applications. By the time he came home with Amanda, he had no idea she already left. But when he couldn't find her that morning, Robin let him know that she attended a Halloween party at a friend's house the night before. When he heard this, Jim was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. She was probably drinking, and she decided to sleep over at a friend's house. He figured she would call and check in or show back up at the house by the afternoon. Maybe she slept in after a long night. I mean, she hadn't even left until a little after 10 p.m. Typically, the morning after a Halloween party or any party isn't nearly as fun and glamorous as the night before. When you're all dressed up in your costume or your cute outfit and you've had a few drinks, you feel emboldened to do things you wouldn't normally do if your face was showing without the mask or you were sober. And that following morning always comes with a healthy dose of reality. Groggy partygoers wake up with blistering hangovers and their face still caked with last night's makeup. When the dark cloud of Halloween is lifted and the costumes are tucked away and the makeup is washed off, everyone goes back to their typical lives in the real world. But Nikki still wasn't home by late afternoon, and she hadn't called her family, so they started to question why. It wasn't like her to be that out of touch. Jim and Robin also noticed that Nikki had left the night before without her purse or her ID. Both were still in her bedroom. Now, granted, this was a house party with friends. She wouldn't have had to show proof that she was 21 years old and she got a ride. But it also signaled to them that Nikki intended to come home in a reasonable amount of time, since at some point she would need her belongings. It's true, if someone has like a purse or a wallet that they use all the time, they're probably not going to even leave that behind at all. And if they do, it's because they figure they'll be right back. So now Nikki's family is growing concerned. They still weren't that worried, but they did begin calling a number of Nikki's friends, and there was a lot to get in touch with. So they were hoping that at least one of them was with her or knew where she was. This went on into the evening, and the family had called everyone who was close to Nikki and then began calling her acquaintances, people she babysat for. They just wanted to exhaust all avenues before taking the dreaded next step of calling the police. But no one knew where Nikki was. And now there was a reason to be concerned. They knew if Nikki was just with friends, she would have let them know, especially if she wasn't coming back home. This is when the Hutchings started to have a very bad feeling, and they reached out to Bend Police Department. Something I didn't know before researching this case is that there's actually a spike in crimes during certain holidays in America, and Halloween is one of them. I figured New Year's, but that's more drunk driving deaths. However, Independence Day and Halloween rank high as times of the year when violent crime in particular tends to go up. Now, I do holiday homicides, and now I know why I stumble on such heartbreaking stories at times when people are usually looking forward to the holiday cheer. The types of crimes that typically go up on July 4th and Halloween are burglaries, carjacking, vandalism, and alcohol-related crimes like underage drinking. Christmas and New Year's, sadly, there's a spike in more domestic crimes, and that's sad and shocking. The police in Bend, Oregon actually dread going on patrol during Halloween night. It's one of the worst nights of year for them. It's as though the darkness of the night dedicated to evil provides a veil for real-life monsters to lurk in those shadows. The police are not used to getting calls for adults going missing, and when they do, you probably know what they assume. That these people want to disappear, that they've left on their own free will, but they still take these reports seriously. Sometimes they just approach them a little differently, but there were some red flags right away in this case. For one, Nikki left her ID and purse behind, as we know, and then she got a ride from someone and no one knew where she was or who that was. There were a lot of unknowns. What Bend police did know was that Nikki was 21 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighed 160 pounds, and had brown hair and blue eyes. The other unique identifiers were that she had a slight gap between her two front teeth, a pierced tongue with a silver barbell, and tattoos of a rose and a dolphin on the back of her left shoulder. She was last seen wearing a maroon polo shirt with the words City of Bend on it, and black windbreaker-style pants with white tennis shoes. The Bend Police Department sent Detective Brian Kendall out to meet the Hutchings and take a detailed report. He talks to Robin, Amanda, and Jim, and they tell him everything we already know. But there were a couple things that I haven't gone into detail about. First, Amanda kept stressing that her sister wouldn't leave like this. And then she mentioned something that stood out. The fact that, remember right before leaving for work, Nikki stopped her and told her she had something important to talk to her about. And then she recalled Nikki just telling her, "I love you, and I'll see you later." But she never did see her later. So she can't help but wonder what Nikki wanted to confide in her about. That bothered Amanda. She felt like it might have something to do with why she's gone. That would be very haunting, not knowing what Nikki was hiding or wanted to get off her chest. The other new piece of evidence is that Nikki had a boyfriend named Bobby. She'd been seeing him for a while, and at first, Jim and Robin liked him. He seemed really nice, and he got along with the whole family, and things seemed to work out really nicely between him and Nikki. But as time went on, The Hutchings felt like they were seeing more of Bobby's true colors, and they did not like the way he treated Nikki. He seemed to take advantage of her, and they had reason to believe that things could have gotten physical between them. So now, since Nikki's missing, they're questioning whether Bobby could be responsible. By the next day, Nikki still had not shown up. This is November 2nd, and there really wasn't much to go on. But Detective Kindell wanted to track Bobby down to see if he had any additional information for them. He also wanted to find out if any of Nikki's friends could provide more information about the location of the Halloween party, as well as the host and everyone that was in attendance that night. They would need to question everyone. Meanwhile, the Hutchings are now in a panic. A whole day has gone by, 24 hours with no word from Nikki. It was hard to go about your normal activities when a huge piece of your life is missing. I couldn't function. I know I couldn't. Every time I do a case like this, I can't help but feel so awful for the family. All they could do was wait. And Jim felt like the worst part was not knowing where Nikki was. That was the hardest part. It's the unknown. Detectives track Bobby Hunt down and ask him if he knew where Nikki was. He essentially told them it's not his job to keep tabs on his ex-girlfriend, and that piqued their interest. Ex-girlfriend. Since when? They wondered. And he let them know right away that he and Nikki broke up over that past weekend. So just a couple days before she attended that Halloween party and was not seen again. And that raised a red flag. Had the breakup turned into something more sinister or even deadly? In order to rule Bobby out, the detectives tell him, "We would like to have a formal interview with you, and we would like you to take a polygraph." I know they're not reliable enough to be used as evidence in court, but they can be used as a tool to detect deception, and that could be a big clue for them. Bobby was asked questions related to whether he had anything to do with Nikki's disappearance, and it turned out there was no deception detected in his responses. He also had an alibi for Halloween night, and it was able to be confirmed. Now, this doesn't mean that they just check him off their list as a potential suspect. It just means for the time being, they can continue looking in other directions that might bring in more viable leads. But they didn't have any, and days just kept passing, and Nikki's family was not doing well. Amanda was having a very hard time dealing with the emptiness that she felt. She said it left a hole. There was just empty space in her life, and she described it as horrifying. The family and even the police began monitoring her credit cards and her bank statements, but there was no recent activity. The local daily newspaper and media outlet called the Bend Bulletin began posting about Nikki's disappearance, and Bend Police Department put out their own news release, asking anyone with information to please contact Detective Brian Kindell. They were still in the process of tracking down all of those partygoers from Halloween night. And finally, one woman that they were interviewing named Mary says that not only is she a friend of Nikki's, but she was at the party and it was thrown at the house she lives in. So of course, they want to know details. Mary explains she lives with two roommates. Both of them are men, Lauren Bowers, and the other is Craig Whiting. They threw a big Halloween party that night. They invited a bunch of their friends, including Nikki, who was very good friends with both of them. Now, Lauren had a girlfriend that had two kids. One was 6 and the other was 4. And Nikki would come over to babysit them all the time. And that's how she met Mary. As far as the party was concerned, Mary said that there was nothing out of the ordinary. But she wasn't able to give a full account of everyone in attendance because there was a lot of people coming and going that night. Some even brought their own friends. But at least they had 2 names of people they could reach out to. They waste no time. They get the address and detectives go over to Lauren and Craig's to see if they could provide them with any new leads. When they arrive, the house is packed with a bunch of friends, roommates are just hanging out, and they ask to speak to 34-year-old Lauren and 23-year-old Craig separately. Both of them say the same thing. They explain they have known Nikki for a long time. Craig tells them that he's a very close friend with her and her family, that he even lived with them for quite some time when he was trying to find a place of his own. And Lauren explains that he's been best friends with Craig, and they lived together with Mary at the house where the Halloween party was held, the one that the officers were standing in front of at that moment. They explained that they planned this party earlier that month, and Craig added that he was actually the one that came to Nikki's house that night. He thought Nikki could use a night out, and he was in the area, so he stopped by to ask her if she wanted to come over. Maybe he knew about the breakup. And you know how that goes. Sometimes when you're finally single, you get to hang out more. Everyone living in Lauren's house was interviewed, but none of them knew where Nikki might be. They said the party was packed, and the last time they think they saw her was probably around midnight. They were all drinking, And many partygoers were heavily intoxicated that night. Nikki's friends were genuinely worried about her. They weren't overly concerned at this point. They were just all hoping that she would turn back up. But no one had heard from her or seen her since that night. If they did provide anything, it was more of their own opinions instead of facts, like giving possibilities of where Nikki might be. Maybe she left with someone. Did you talk to her boyfriend? Things like that. However, the detectives were able to get more names of friends who were there that night. And when asked if they remembered seeing Nikki, many said they didn't. And if anyone said they did, it was maybe for a few minutes. It's kind of like she was invisible that night. No one really recalled when she left or even seeing her leave. They don't remember anything that stood out to them. For example, if she had been like the last to leave the party with a whole bunch of other people, maybe somebody would remember that. Like, we closed it down. It was like no significant interactions took place to put a time on when they recalled seeing her last, if at all. And it is tough. You don't go into a party or anywhere saying, I better remember everything I saw because I'm going to be questioned about this later. It's hard to rack your brain after the fact. And now detectives wonder if Nikki wandered out of this house on her own that night. Did she get intoxicated and walk off? Did she get kidnapped? Was there a stranger in this house with bad intentions? But they weren't much further in this investigation. And when Nikki's family was asked about Lauren and Craig, it was kind of a dead end. They echoed the same things that the guys had told the detectives. Jim confirmed that Craig is a close friend of Nikki's. Everyone loved him. They called him Baby Huey because he was a big, goofy guy and a good guy. So this helped detectives move along and expand the search outward to other states now. Nikki's picture, all of her information, and details surrounding her disappearance was shared across agencies all over the country. Since they don't have any new leads, they decide to run some background checks on everyone living at the house that hosted the party, as well as people that were in attendance. They have to start somewhere. And there weren't that many things that stood out if anyone had a record. There were no violent crimes. Craig didn't have any offenses, but there was one thing that looked questionable in regard to Nikki's good friend, Lauren Bowers. It's something that stunned everyone close to him, especially Nikki's family. It turned out that Lauren was a registered S offender. I think you know what that means, and it's not good. And no one knew. Nikki's dad remembers getting that news and being floored. He could not imagine that at all. The charge, in case you're wondering, was from a decade before this, and it was for intercourse with someone underage, and this man was 24 at the time. So, of course, Dr. Kendall goes back to confront Lauren about his past, and he's very open about it. He explains, that was a mistake. It's something from my past. It happened a long time ago, and he's moved forward. It had been, I think, a decade by then, and he wants to keep it in the past. He told them that he would do whatever they needed in order to cooperate in Nikki's case. And I mean, wow, this is pretty disturbing, and it makes me wonder if anyone close to him knew about this. I mean, he was registered, but as it related to Nikki's case at hand, there was no connection or evidence that Lauren or anyone else they interviewed knew anything. Plus, at this point, it's still a missing persons case. They don't have any real evidence to connect to anyone. They're still in the information gathering phase. Now, Nikki's family organized a local search effort in Bend. They distributed flyers with her picture and a description, and several members of her family spoke to local media, and they asked anyone with information to contact law enforcement. And that's when people started to come forward. They were telling police that they had seen Nikki, and this made her family so hopeful. But the problem was none of these eyewitness accounts could be confirmed. And as a bus driver, all Jim found himself doing was driving by Drake Park every time he was working and just keeping his eyes out for anyone that looked like his daughter. The whole family was having a hard time believing that this was their new reality, but they were really trying to hold on to hope that Nikki would be found and found alive. Every time they saw someone that resembled her, they stopped and they took a closer look. And every time a knock came to the door, they thought it could be Nikki, but it wasn't. And then things take a darker turn. There were 3 separate tipsters who came forward and told the police to look into a guy known as Spider. But the reason why was pretty terrifying. Apparently, this man had admitted to killing Nikki and burying her body on his property. Yeah, that would definitely be a reason to look into him. So they made the Spider person their main priority, and after digging deeper, they find out his real name is Danny Shane. He's also a convicted felon, and he's associated with a local and violent gang known as the Park Rats, and the name might be kind of silly, but their actions were nothing to laugh about. They had been committing offenses on people in the downtown Bend area, targeting Drake Park specifically. That's where the name came from, park rats. But that's also a location that Nikki frequented. It was not the safest place at night. During the day, beautiful, but at night, it was being overrun by homeless encampments. There were alcohol-related offenses going on and natural risks as well, like wild animals coming out and roaming the area. So many locals knew better than to go there at night. This particular gang had been known to be involved in drug dealing, and Spider specifically had a bad reputation for harassing people. He was also the so-called gang leader. So they apprehend him and they bring him in for questioning. When the name Spider is mentioned to Nikki's family, the detectives are surprised that they're actually familiar with Danny. They do not know him personally, but Jim and Amanda have both heard the name before because Nikki went to high school with Danny, or Spider. And he had changed a lot since then, and Jim definitely made it clear he was not a fan. So the detectives ask Spider how he knows Nikki, and he says high school. And they say, "When's the last time you talked to her?" And he says he thinks it was a few weeks ago. Well, that lines up to when she went missing. So they ask whether there was an issue between the two of them, and he's looking at them genuinely confused and says no. And that's when they let him know that Nikki was missing. So you know what he tells them? He tells them that she probably wanted to go somewhere if she's gone. That's not the best answer. So they go one step further and they give him a polygraph, which Danny agrees to. And he passes with no deception. But it was so hard not to think that he knew more than he was letting on. I mean, those are pretty harsh allegations that he's going around telling people he killed Nikki and she was buried on his property. So after letting him go, the Bend Police Department sent out helicopters to fly over Danny's house and the land that he lived on. They were looking for disturbed ground where a grave could have been dug, but they were not able to locate anything. It's been a few weeks now, and they were scanning for a grave, which meant there was a possibility that they believed that Nikki could be dead. And her family had already been preparing themselves to get that kind of news because weeks turned into months and still nothing. And the chances of her being alive didn't seem high. Something I wanted to mention is that Nikki's little brother Tim was only 13, and he had a very hard time understanding that someone could just be gone. It's not something that parents think about explaining to their children. They don't ever think they're going to have to explain that their sibling just vanishes. And it's not something we usually teach our children about because we don't ever want that to be the case in our own family. Jim said that Tim worshipped the ground that Nikki walked on. He was completely lost without his big sister, and the whole family felt disconnected. They all had a new purpose, and that was finding Nikki. It consumed them day in and day out. Amanda didn't even know who she was without being a younger sister to Nikki. Her whole identity was in crisis. It's like they could not move forward without answers. And it wasn't long after this that the Hutchings were contacted by the Portland, Oregon Police Department. And it's not a call that any family wants to receive. They were told that a body had been found, and it matched Nikki's description. So they wanted someone from the family to make an identification. Everyone was in shock. But Jim decided to ask one question. Did the victim have a tattoo of a dolphin on her left shoulder? And as they waited to hear back, I'm sure it was agonizing. And when the officer called Jim and informed him that there was not a tattoo located on this person, as harsh as it sounds, they were relieved that it wasn't Nikki. But it was heartbreaking that somewhere out there was a family that lost someone. Sadly, now the Hutchings knew what it was like to get a phone call like that, and they were hoping they wouldn't have to experience the reality of it. But we know the story doesn't end well. Finally, there seemed to be some surprisingly good news. Detectives had continued to track Nikki's credit card, her bank account, and cell phone, and after a few months, their persistence eventually paid off. The detectives received a hit on one of Nicole's credit cards, and they were excited. This was an indication that Nikki was still out there. They just needed to track down where these purchases were made, and they didn't waste any time. They immediately reached out to the Hutchings, and Robin answered, and they let her know the news. But all hope was dashed when Robin admitted that it was actually her that used that account. It was not Nikki. And that would be tough because you're expecting to hear some good news, and then it's not. It's nothing. It's another dead end. And after so many months went by, the calls from detectives came in less and less because the case was growing colder and colder. Life was standing still for the Hutchings. Amanda was a senior in high school, and she was so excited about applying to colleges earlier that year and eagerly awaiting her acceptance letters. But now, none of that seemed important. Eventually, she did learn that she had not only been accepted to a university in Minnesota, but she got a full scholarship, and she was overjoyed to hear this news. But at the same time, she could not leave her family, not at a time like this. The question about what happened to Nikki would linger for close to 3 long years. As it turned out, there was someone hiding something. They knew what happened. It took them that long to build up the courage to come forward and reveal that secret. And I'm sitting here imagining holding in a secret like that. In March of 2007, a woman that I'm going to call Jenny came into the Bend police station wanting to speak with an officer. She's an old friend of Nikki's, and she wants to come forward with information about her disappearance. Now for some background. They find out they had already interviewed Jenny back when they were questioning everyone who attended the Halloween party. She was there. She was the girlfriend of Lauren Bowers, the one with the 6-year-old and the 4-year-old child at the time. She's the mother of one of Lauren's children, the younger one. But they had a pretty rocky relationship, and they had since broken up. That is what prompted her to speak up, and what she says astonishes the detectives. They asked her what happened, and Jenny said that Lauren killed Nikki. They wanted to know how she knew that, and Jenny admitted that Lauren told her he was going to kill Nikki that night, and later she saw her show up at that house, and she knew it wasn't going to be good. That is a lot to keep inside, and she goes on to explain that she remembers a couple days after Lauren told her that he was going to kill Nikki, and then she showed up at the Halloween party. That's when police come to their door and tell them she's missing. Jenny was questioned, but at the time, she lied. And she said it had been a few weeks since she saw Nikki last, but that wasn't true. She told them she lied because she was scared. She says that Lauren actually threatened her, saying if she ever told anyone, he would shoot her in the head, right between the eyes, actually. This wasn't the first time he told her not to talk, so she kept quiet. But this was merely words. It was a story. There was no solid proof. At this point, there wasn't even a body. So the detectives devised a plan. They asked Jenny if she thought that Lauren would talk to her about the whole situation, and she said she thought he would. So this woman bravely agreed to wear a wire and meet with Lauren while the cops are standing by with rifles and they're listening in to make sure that Jenny isn't in any danger. She arranged to meet Lauren at a park to talk, and the plan seemed to work. Lauren met with Jenny, and she told him she wanted to know everything that happened to Nikki. Here's part of that interaction that was recorded.
Can I trust you?
Yes, you can trust me. I want to know what happened.
That bitch was trying to destroy my life with you. How was I supposed to stop?
Lauren asked Jenny if he could trust her. When she said yes, he revealed that Nikki was trying to destroy Lauren's life with Jenny. He didn't know what else he was supposed to do, and he would rather be dead than go back to jail. He actually said he would rather take his own life than go back to jail. But detectives have no idea what Lauren is referring to, but they're still listening in, hoping to get some more context. But instead, Lauren starts to become agitated, with Jenny asking more and more probing questions. He wants to know, why all of a sudden do you want to know about all this? And that's not good.
How come before you didn't want to talk to me about none of this, and all of a sudden now you want to talk?
Because it's been bugging me.
He gets suspicious and he point blank asked Jenny if she told the cops he had done something, and then he asked her if she was wearing a wire. And Jenny, of course, said no. And she's like, you actually believe that I would wear an effing wire? And I guess that was convincing. But Lauren explains, ironically, that Jenny has no idea how good the technology is, that they could tap anything. And this is 2007. So imagine how far it's come now.
Why are you asking me these questions? Did you tell the cops I did something?
You actually believe I would wear a wire?
You don't understand the technology they have now. They can tap anything.
But this is not going well for Jenny. However, somehow, she knew how to calm him down. Enough for him to admit that in his words, he had her gotten rid of. Wow.
I'm gonna need to know, what did you do?
I had her gotten rid of, okay?
That was enough to arrest Lauren Bowers. It was at the very least an admission that he knew what happened to Nikki, and he had something to do with it, if he wasn't the person that actually did it. They apprehended him a few days later on March 12th, not to tip off that Jenny helped them. More in-depth background checks revealed the that Lauren was a twice convicted S offender who was sentenced to nearly 2 years in prison in 1995 for first and third degree forced intercourse. Go look it up. It's not good. The victims were 13 to 16. Yeah. And after his release from prison in 1997, he dropped out of the offender program altogether and he stopped reporting to his probation officer for quite some time. He had also been convicted of being a felon in possession of a firearm, theft, and giving false information to police. So they're thinking they're probably not going to get someone that's going to cooperate with them with this investigation. But they were wrong, because as soon as Lauren sat down, he was in tears. He was begging them to believe that he had nothing to do with this. Here's a clip of that so you can see his demeanor.
You guys need to know I did not do this. And I know that motherfucker is going to probably try and pin it on me.
He's saying someone else is involved, and that person is probably going to try to pin everything on Lauren. So who's this other person? Well, according to Lauren, it was none other than his very best friend, Craig Whiting. You know, the guy who came to pick Nikki up the night of the party? The close friend of hers who knew her family for years, who Jim called a big, goofy, good guy. Why would he have a reason to hurt Nikki? These people were all close. Well, Detective Kendall, who's already spoken to Craig back when he did his initial investigation, calls him back in for a follow-up interview. And he gets right to the point. He's like, listen, we know what happened. And you're close friends with this family. They took you in when you had nothing. It's time for you to do the right thing and admit what you have done to their daughter. And you could physically see him take this deep breath. And detectives thought, okay, he is going to spill. They asked him who is the mastermind behind Nikki's disappearance, and he said the mastermind was Lauren. So how was Craig involved? Well, according to him, Lauren asked Craig to help him get rid of Nikki. And when Detective Kendall asked, well, what does that mean to you, get rid of, take care of her? And Craig just says, probably killing her. And he's so nonchalant. But why, though?
Who masterminded this? Who masterminded would be Lauren. What did he say he was going to do to her? He just said he was going to take care of her. So, I mean, what does doing away with her mean to you? Probably kill her.
Craig said that it all started when Nikki, in his words, began spreading rumors about Lauren, that he had touched one of the children inappropriately that Nikki babysat for. And if that got out, it's something that could put Lauren back in jail. Nikki babysat for a few of the people who lived at Lauren's, and one of the mother's young children came to her and told her that Lauren did something inappropriate and took pictures of her without clothes. Well, this was serious. Nikki was also in fear for the children due to drug-related activities that she witnessed going on at that house. So this was it. Nikki brought this information to the mother of that child, and the mother confronted Lauren about it. Now, I don't know who this child was, whether this was one of Jenny's children, you know, the one that's not biologically Lauren's, because this was a 6-year-old, and we know that Jenny had a 6-year-old at the time. Because if you recall in the wiretap, Lauren explicitly said that Nikki was trying to ruin his life with Jenny. That could merely mean that he knew if he went to jail, they would no longer be a couple, or it could be something more. Whoever it was whose child was involved, when their mother confronted Lauren, he went into a rage. He was punching walls, and he asked them, who told you this? When they admitted it was Nikki, he told them he would kill Nikki. So this does sound like what Jenny admitted to. Then he went on to say something so disgusting and chilling. He said that he had holes in the ground around Smith Rock and Sun River that could swallow Nikki up. It turned out that when detectives looked into these allegations, they were not rumors. Nikki had gone one step further and filed an actual complaint with the Oregon Department of Human Services, alleging that Lauren was inappropriate with the child and exposed them to a drug-filled environment. But how does Craig fit into all of this? Remember, he doesn't even have a criminal record. And when they were waiting for him to hopefully confess everything that happened, they stumble upon a very frightening detail about Craig's past. One that makes them question whether he could be capable of hurting anyone, especially a woman, and I was shocked when I found this out. It sounds too insane to be real, but I assure you, it is the truth. Back when Craig was only 11 years old, he and his mother, Margaret, who went by Peggy and was 38 at the time, were living with Peggy's boyfriend, 40-year-old John Mata, in his double-wide mobile home in Anchorage, Alaska. Peggy went missing between April 25th and 27th of 1992. And when she didn't show up at work, Her sister Suzanne was alerted, and she ended up calling Peggy's boyfriend, who told her that Peggy had gone on a drunken vacation in Seattle, and he had been receiving calls from her that she was going to return on May 28th. But when she didn't show up, her coworkers filed a missing persons report. She had been gone for 5 weeks at this time. On May 30th, Peggy's sister flew out to Anchorage and showed up unannounced at the mobile home where her nephew Craig was living with John. When John opened the door, he apologized immediately for the terrible smell and said that Peggy's dogs, his words, pottied inside the house. At this point, Suzanne hadn't even noticed the smell at all, but this whole situation seemed very suspicious. So she took 11-year-old Craig with her and she left. A few days later, Suzanne went back to the mobile home to get some of her nephew's things. And that's when she noticed the entire place had been cleaned from top to bottom, and it reeked of pine sol. Again, John says, "I'm sorry, I was just trying to get rid of the doggy smell." Well, Anchorage Police Department learned that John was on parole for burglary, robbery, and theft. Plus, after interviewing several people, there were so many inconsistencies in his story. Not only that, friends of Peggy came forward and said that she told them that her and John had been fighting in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, and one time he tried to choke her. Without going into too much detail to derail from Nikki's case, I'll tell you what you can probably guess. Craig's mom, Peggy, she was dead. And poor Craig had been living among his mother's corpse this entire time. John had crammed her into the crawl space underneath the double wide trailer. And then he lied to Craig and said that his mother ran off and left him. Can you imagine at 11 years old feeling like your mom did that to you? And all the while, John was going down there and pouring bottle after bottle of pine sol all over Peggy's remains to hide the smell of decomposition. Once John knew that they found Peggy, he told the police he killed her, but it was all in self-defense, isn't it always? His story was that on the night of the killing, Peggy came home drunk and attacked him in his sleep. She was yelling at him. She was berating him for not going to a bar with her. John said he had to fight back, so he grabbed whatever was nearby, and that was a large, heavy metal ashtray. And he took it and he swung it at Peggy and smashed her head in. But to his surprise, she continued to yell and struggle, so he stuffed socks in her mouth to silence her. As the situation escalated, he tied her arms and hands with rope, and then he tied the rope around her neck, ultimately choking her to death. Then he wrapped her body in plastic and lowered her into that crawl space beneath the double wide trailer. That is so disgusting. And poor Craig, we will never know what he witnessed. If he was home that night, he surely must have heard something behind those thin walls. So after John's confession, he was sentenced to 99 years in prison. And there was little Craig in the courtroom, holding a box containing his mother's ashes. So knowing that Craig's own mother had been murdered, would he ever condone an act like this? Did he really have anything to do with this, or was his older best buddy trying to pin it all on him? Well, back in the interview room, Detective Kendall asked Craig, "Did Nikki do anything to you to upset you?" And he said, "No, she hadn't." What he admitted to next blows my mind. He said that he figured since Lauren is his best friend, he should be able to do anything for a best friend, even murder. Yeah, Craig admitted he looked to Lauren as his older brother, and if a brother asks you to do something, you help them out. If you can do it, you do it. And when bluntly asked, even commit murder, Craig said yes. But had he, or was he just covering for Lauren? They needed more to go on. But wow, the lengths that some people will go for loyalty. Detective Kendall said this was deeply disturbing to him. It would be for most of us who are human beings. To get a confession from Lauren, they told him that they had him on tape admitting that he had gotten rid of Nikki. He refused to admit that he said that, but we know he did because we heard it and they were there. And they saw his demeanor change. That's when they told him, "We talked to Craig, and it's time to allow Nikki's parents to bury their daughter." But it would take 2 whole days so they could piece together exactly what happened. But they got it out of them with the most important piece of evidence, where Nikki was. To avoid being sentenced to death, Craig agreed to show Detective Vincent and Kendall where they buried Nikki's body. The detectives made note that Craig's remorse, well, there was none. It was like he accidentally ran over a cat. And that would be a lot for me, but what they meant was that it seemed like this wasn't a big deal to him. He didn't have an ounce of compassion. How can people like this exist? I don't know. But meanwhile, Lauren was still making confessions about exactly what happened, and I will tell you everything after I explain where Craig instructed the detectives to look. It was a very remote area, about 20 miles out in the middle of a forest off a fire road. Here's the location I was able to pinpoint. There is nothing out here. This area is southeast of the town of Sun River. And remember, Jenny said that Lauren told her he had holes in Sun River that would swallow Nikki up. This is probably only about 35 to 40 minutes away from where they had that Halloween party, but the detectives admitted they would have never looked here. More than a dozen officers, crime scene technicians, and search personnel went out there to assist, and a cadaver dog was brought out to sniff for human remains. Craig led them to an area in the middle of the trees where he said that him and Lauren made sure to put a partially burned log over the site where Nikki was. But this had been almost 3 years, and there was a lot out there. I'm going to show you on the screen if you're watching and not just listening, but there's a lot of logs out there, and they didn't know exactly where the location was, but it didn't take them long to narrow it down. And they began digging using shovels and buckets in a 4x6 area. Here are some pictures of this excavation on the screen. Finally, that evening in a shallow grave, officers found probable human remains that they believed belonged to Nicole Hutchings. Now it was time to hear the whole story and to charge both Lauren Bowers and Craig Whiting with the murder of Nicole Hutchings. Putting together both confessions, detectives were able to ascertain that Lauren wanted to silence Nikki. She was doing all she could to defend this innocent child and keep them safe, only to be met with a monster who would rather have her destroyed than to face the consequences of his own disgusting actions. So back in early October 2004, Lauren devised a plan with his bestie Craig to get rid of Nikki. They needed a way to get her alone though, so they thought of something simple, something innocuous, and they came up with throwing a big Halloween party and inviting the entire neighborhood, all of their friends, including Nikki. But the night before this big bash, they went out to that remote location and they dug a 3-foot grave, a shallow 3-foot grave, knowing that they planned to kill Nikki the very next night, to put her inside there. It's so evil and heartless. Then on the night of October 31st, Craig was the one that went over there and convinced Nikki to come have some fun. Lauren did his best to stay kind of out of sight that night, and he let Craig handle serving Nikki drink after drink of what they called jungle punch. But Nikki's was spiked with Vicodin, and it didn't take long for poor Nikki to be barely coherent. She was unable to walk without assistance, and she was totally out of it. And that's when they got her into Lauren's truck. And Craig told the investigators he was hammered, and he drove Lauren and an incapacitated Nikki out to the makeshift gravesite. Once they were there, Craig agreed to make it quick. He wanted to get it over quickly, so they dragged her out of the vehicle to where the grave was dug. Then Craig took what's called a tire buddy. This is a heavy metal-tipped instrument like a club. It's used to check tire pressure on vehicles. I'm showing one on the screen. It kind of looks like a bat or a wooden stick. It's 16 inches long. And he took it and swung it at the back of Nikki's head at full force. He thought he could kill her in one strike. But when she was knocked down, she proceeded to get back up. She was not dead. That's when Lauren grabbed this club-like item. He grabbed it right out of Craig's hands and began pounding Nikki again and again until she was unconscious. But before Nikki stopped breathing, the men stripped her down and dumped her into the hole in the ground. And then they covered her with dirt. This woman was buried alive. She suffocated to death all alone out in those dark woods after two of her closest friends tricked her on a night reserved for tricks of a more innocent kind. It's unfathomable. It's pure evil. By Tuesday afternoon on March 13th, both men were arrested and charged with 1 count each of aggravated murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and 2 counts of first-degree kidnapping. They were held without bail. The aggravated circumstances related to the deliberate cruelty involved in this case and that a weapon was used on a vulnerable victim. The aggravated murder count alleges that these men were trying to cover up the crimes of child neglect and criminal mistreatment by killing Nikki. Lauren was also charged in relation to that young child. Excavation of the site was continuing on Tuesday evening, and the remains were sent to the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office for confirmation of identification. They said it would be weeks before authorities would know if the remains were 100% confirmed to be Nicole's. The cause of death was still under investigation. They also obtained a search warrant for a Dodge Travelcraft motorhome that was near Lone Cow Drive, which I'm showing here. This is where Lauren was apparently living at the time of his arrest, and it was believed that this was the vehicle that Nikki was transported in and that the instrument that was used to try to kill her was still inside. Police seized evidence, putting it into brown paper bags, and then they impounded that vehicle for processing at the crime lab. That night, around 9:45, detectives showed up at the Hutchings front door. Jim knew when he saw them that this was something bad. Amanda looked right at the detectives and said, "Please don't tell me that my sister's dead." And they looked at her, just shaking their heads back and forth, and she knew. And right then, she collapsed onto the floor. But once everyone was able to gain their composure, the detectives had more bad news. They revealed who was responsible for Nikki's murder, and when her family found out who had done this, they were shocked. Craig, Goofy Craig, who was cared for in their own home. How? And Lauren, Nikki's best friend. Why? Jim said he wished they would both rot in hell. The family was then led into the coroner's office at this time, and Jim will never forget seeing Nikki's dolphin tattoo and knowing that this time it was really her. It was unbelievable. It was the worst news a family could have gotten. But at least she was found. And Jim said she is home. But he also said he would like to save taxpayers' money and take care of these monsters himself. That is how angry he was towards both of them. Because how could they do such a thing? Amanda said her sister died a hero. She was killed for protecting a child, for doing the right thing. And it reminded me so much of Allie Lamont. I talked about her case in the beginning of this month. Another very sad story. They did not deserve this. A memorial service was held for Nikki on Friday, March 23rd, and her family and friends gathered around to say their goodbyes and to share memories of Nikki. It would be nearly another year until both Lauren and Craig pleaded guilty to Nikki's murder. Lauren would plead guilty in December of 2007, but he did say he never did anything to that child. He said in court, quote, "I want to apologize, to give my deepest regrets for the pain and suffering I caused Nicole and her family. I deserve the punishment that has been given," end quote. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Then Craig finally pleaded guilty in February of 2008. And the circuit court judge, Alta Brady, was presiding over his sentencing trial, and they were trying to actually decide if he would spend the rest of his life in prison or someday have a chance to get out. And I'm sitting here thinking, life for sure, but his lawyer brought up the fact that Craig's own mother was murdered. And he tried to use that as some kind of bargaining chip, some reason that this man should be allowed a second chance. But so much was set forth by the deputy district attorney in this case. There was a pathologist who testified that they found dirt in Nikki's lungs. And I was stunned when I heard that, because I was thinking after all that time passed that her organs wouldn't even be there after decomposition. And that led me to conduct some very questionable Google searches. But apparently there are ways to tell. Even if they couldn't, these men admitted she wasn't dead when they dropped her into that grave. Now, they weren't actually able to tell the cause of death because of how decomposed Nikki's body was. So that's why it was a little confusing to me whether or not they were able to tell where the dirt came from. Because if a person's put in a grave and they're covered with dirt, that made me a little bit confused. But in my opinion, if the court accepted this testimony to be reliable and this expert witness was qualified, then I'm going to assume that their testimony was truthful and that there was a way that this could be determined. So the judge concluded that this was premeditated in every sense of the word. It was cold-blooded, and that Craig would still be a danger to others if he was released from prison in the future, because he was, in her words, quote, "dysfunctionally susceptible to the influence of others," end quote. And I had never heard it put that way, but yes, indeed he was. This is peer pressure to another level. And he didn't even need to be pressured. He was asked and he complied. Craig Whiting was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Nikki's mother, Robin, sobbed through the whole sentencing hearing. And then she turned and hugged her family. And once it was over, she was so happy that Nikki could finally rest in peace. And she thanked the deputy district attorney for all that she had done. The family didn't know that Nikki was buried alive until that hearing. It was so hard to hear, especially for a loved one, because even for me to imagine that horrific image in my mind of Nikki's final moments and how scared she must have been. In other cases, I've actually heard people say that it's a good thing if a victim is drugged or they're unconscious, they don't know what's happening. But honestly, either way, this is heartbreaking. And the family was glad that it was over, that these two men would never see the light of day. Amanda said that maybe now she could go back to college after she declined that full scholarship back in 2004 when Nikki was still missing. I just hope that somehow this family is able to find some peace. And I'm so sorry for everyone in Nikki's family and all of her loved ones. And I thank you all so very much for giving her your time to listening to this story. I want to thank you all for being here. I will see you in my next video. Bye.